we use Nutube a lot in our new products, and usually the question is, well, is it a tube? Is it an op amp? You know, what's going on there?
Yeah, yeah, we get that a lot, and the simple answer is yes, yes, it's a tube. It is not solid state. It is a tube. It might not look like, you know, your normal dual triode 12AX7, but it's a tube, and it's Korg and, well, mainly Korg and VOX have been in development of Nutube. I think it must be 6 or 7 years it's taken to come to this point. And it was derived from technology for VFDs, and VFDs are vacuum fluorescent displays. And you'll see those all over the place. They'll be on microwave ovens, you know, any of those kind of glowing, bright displays that show the time or whatever, that's a VFD. And we have some very big-brained people who thought, well, that's kind of halfway to being the same as a vacuum tube. I wonder if this manufacturer of these VFDs would be interested in an experiment and see if we can make a tube with a VFD. And that's exactly what happened. And it's now completely been engineered from the ground up to be a fully functioning dual direct heated triode that works at low voltage, at super low current, a really low heater voltage, but still has all of the harmonic content that a tube would have.
Right.
So when there's a vacuum in there, you know, as it's a vacuum tube, the electrons have to pass through a vacuum to get to where they need to go. They're being burnt off just like in a real tube. You know, the tube gets hot, it burns off the electrons, they travel through the vacuum, they get grabbed, and they get spat out the other side. Bit simplified, but basically the same thing. Right. And that's what the Nutube does, you know, and we're not pulling wool over anyone's eyes at all. You know, the Nutube is pretty much the greatest leap forward in tube technology in about 50 years, as far as micro, you know, miniaturization, is concerned. Because, you know, when solid state came along, that tube development pretty much ceased. You know, and for good reason, really, because you know, we're looking at mobile phones or cell phones or whatever, and the amount of transistors that are inside computers these days. You couldn't do that with vacuum tubes. No way. You know, your standard cell phone would be as big as the Washington Monument. It would be enormous, and which is completely impractical. But audio, you can't make that. You just can't replace that tube tone that you can get from a tube. You know, the second order harmonic content. It's really, really something that can only be created by a tube. And that's why within audio, they just refuse to go away. If you look at high-end audiophile hi-fis, for example, it's tubes, you know, and that's what we've achieved with the Nutube. So being that it's small, being that it's low power, low current, it means that it's available in way, way more applications. So you're not limited by size, you're not limited by the amount of voltage it needs, and you're certainly not limited by how much current it's going to draw. So it's a lot more versatile in that respect. So you can basically make, you know, an amp that's 50-watt tube amp, and it's this big, you know, and this is the Mini Super Beetle, and this uses the Nutube. And, you know, without the Nutube, you know, the amp may have to be bigger. We might need a bigger power supply. We might not be able to make it as miniaturized as we have, the same as the MV50s. The MV50s are tiny, but they are fully functioning tube amps with a 50-watt power stage. So what it's done is it's really sort of opened up a hell of a lot of avenues for like miniaturization, new products, and putting tubes in places where they might not have been able to go before. Like the Volkers, like the Korg Volker, you know, the Volker new base has a Nutube in there, and that's tiny. And there's no way you'd be able to put a Nutube, you know, a standard tube in those products without making the products a lot bigger. So it's another option, and it's another tonality. And we're extremely proud of what's been achieved with the Nutube and the development in partnership with Korg and the Noritake company. And it just means that we can put tube tone in the hands of a lot more people, and I think that's really important.
Make it a little bit more accessible in something like the Cambridge or Mini Super Beetle.
Exactly.
Where at this point that might be solid state or fully digital or things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really great. When I first played a Mini Super Beetle, that was my first experience with Nutube, and it blew me away. And I notice when we go to trade shows like NAMM and things like that, if somebody comes up to the booth and they play a Nutube amp without having played one before, and I tell them that's a 50-watt tube amp and pick it up, and then they pick it up and their jaw drops.
Yeah, that's right.
The confusion is almost, that's what we're trained that tube isn't: lightweight and affordable and easy to use.
Yeah.
And now here it is, and all those things. So
yeah, it's certainly something that we've been striving for. Again, like I say, it's putting tubes in the hands of the masses and just miniaturizing things. We're getting older a little bit. Things are a bit heavier than they used to be, for sure. I think having the Nutube there certainly means that. And there's lots. Nutube's not just being used in VOX products. It's out there. There was the Nutube Screamer, of course, that was used in things like that. So other manufacturers are using Nutube and discovering new ways and new things that can be done with Nutube, and adding a whole new tonality to their products, which is great fun.
Yeah. So thank you for that kind of behind the scenes look on that. I know that's the most confusing for a lot of people. Myself included, and when I know what it is, and it's hard for me to vocalize that. And when I do explain it, I use that analogy that if a traditional tube is an incandescent light bulb, this is a fluorescent light bulb.
Sure.
They're somewhat based on similar technologies.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely right.
Not the perfect analogy, but it kind of gives the idea. And so that usually is helpful in understanding, but I think still there's that extra step of being explained that it's actually a vacuum. It's actually the electrons are going through the element, and it's all the processes of a traditional tube amp, but done in a much smaller tube.